Good evening and welcome to today's session, which has been organized to understand the nature and contours of the COVID relief work undertaken by Shri Om Birla ji, Honorable Speaker of Lok Sabha, in his parliamentary constituency of Kota in the state of Rajasthan. As we all know, the second wave of COVID was particularly brutal for a state like Rajasthan, which does not have state of the art medical infrastructure. In this context, it becomes important to understand that apart from various state governments across the country, our elected lawmakers, our elected parliamentarians also played a crucial role in facilitating COVID relief for their constituents. We are delighted that Ms. Anjali Birla has joined today's session to throw light on the work done by Honorable Speaker Sir. Ms. Anjali Birla is a 24-year-old civil servant who cleared the prestigious UPSC examination in her very first attempt. She graduated in political science from Delhi University in 2018. She is the daughter of Shri Om Birla ji, Honorable Speaker of Lok Sabha, and helped extensively during the second wave of COVID to provide help to COVID patients in and around Kota. I thank Ms. Anjali Birla for taking time out of her busy schedule to join today's session. To commence today's session, my first question to Ms. Anjali Birla is if you could kindly share your experience as it relates to facilitating help for COVID patients in Kota. What were the broad learnings that you picked up from this entire experience during the second wave? Ms. Birla.
Hi everyone, very good evening, and thank you, Abhinji, for inviting me here. So, answering your first question, that how was it to help during that? I think it was a very distressing time. It was a very disheartening time, heartbreaking time. Uh, we were very much prepared in the first wave mentally, but the second wave literally shook us. It was unprecedented. We weren't prepared, and it was a panicky situation. And getting distress calls, SOS calls, just made me feel also anxious and troubled. But as my father had pointed out then as well, that if you have compassion in heart, and if you keep doing the right work, and if you keep trying to help, then we will get to the end of it. And I'm happy that India is out of the second wave, and I really really hope that we are better prepared for the third wave or any such event which could happen.
Yes, that is absolutely true. Well said. Now, my second question to you is if you could throw light on the challenges that were faced by a state like Rajasthan in general, and particularly by a city like Kota, what were the challenges as far as in terms of facilitating COVID relief for people was concerned? What were the major issues that were cropping up when you were working along with the Honorable Speaker, sir? What was your experience? What were the major issues in and around Kota and in general Rajasthan? If you would also like to throw some light on that.
So the first wave, we were there was lockdown which was imposed, and Kota and Rajasthan, there were shortages. There were two primary concerns. First was how would we get the supplies, and there was economic distress for migrants and for the other daily wage workers. And the second was the migrant labor issue, that how do you migrate people from their workplace to their hometown. So particularly in Kota, that was well tackled by father, because there so he made it a team. So then every ward had a ward worker, which is like a karyakarta, we say in Hindi. So he would go and he would rationalize that who are the people who need the ration kits, and ration kits were made. So that took care of the first part. And for the second part, basically in Kota we have the issue because it's a student hub where lakhs of students are coming to study for IIT, and to prepare for IIT JEE exam and PMT. So it was a challenge to take them back to their home safely. Their parents were anxious, their guardians were anxious. So for that, father coordinated with the Ministry of Railways at the center, and then special trains were arranged for the students so that they can be taken back. That is for the first wave. Second wave was unprecedented. Yet somehow around, like, I remember the dates also so starkly, around like 17, 18 April, it became clearer that such kind of crisis is impending and it is going to come. So during that time, I think Papa was the one of the first people to extend the helpline number. So he extended a COVID helpline number. It was a 24/7 line, and very happy to share that it was operational till the very end of the second wave and its panicking situation. And this COVID helpline number and the system that was set for it already, like there were people who would be on the call, there were shift duties for it. There was a system that you have to keep track record of who's asking for what, and you have to if you are not able to answer them, then you have to call back. And in case they have requested for, say, hospital bed or injection, then you have to take a follow back in every 2 to 3 days. So this system was already in place before the panic struck. So I think that gave, I would not say we were better prepared, but we were better arranged in Kota. I can definitely vouch for that, than probably in the rest of the country, because of the fact that he foresaw it coming, not that early, but then early in the sense like till 17-18 April, the helpline number was extended. The other thing that we did to be better arranged was the fact that the AIMS had prescribed medicines that if you catch COVID, so for the first week, these are the medicines that you have to take. So medical kits were already made of those primary medicines. So they were already made at the Kota office. That is, and this is all private effort. Like, it is not government of India effort or government of Rajasthan effort. It is a purely MP effort, like a member of parliament and a humanitarian would do. So medical kits were prepared at the Kota office of Papa's, and it was so that it was of that view that in case if someone catches COVID and they are not well aware, because in Kota, if you see that urban city is lesser, but then there are eight what you call jillas, and which are like not that literate, they're attached to it. So there was a lack of awareness also. And those medical kits were well prepared so that in case somebody catches it, so at least they can get those primary medicines well at their home, and they can get treated at home. So all even after all of this system was well in place, yet when the panic struck, when the hospital beds shortage happened, the shortages happened, it was all a very kind of, I cannot have a better word than panic for it, because it was really very panicking. It was distressing. It was disheartening. It felt like we would lose our near and dear ones, and we could see that many people were losing their near and dear ones. And Kota was not an exception to it. Kota was also badly hit by COVID. Rajasthan was badly hit by COVID. There were shortages of injections, there were shortages of hospital beds, there was shortage of oxygen. So all of these things did come to the city and to the state as well. So but as the distress calls started coming up, and that there is a need for hospital beds or remdesivir injections, so there was a system in place but already. So we could direct those calls to that helpline number. And by but for 1 or 2 weeks, the helpline number also got very bogged down. So I volunteered, and many other people, like Papa would get calls on his personal number, I would get calls on personal number or social media. We started picking up case on our own which could not reach to the helpline number, because it became a very haywire of a situation. So when we would take up these calls, we would try our best. So even if we would go for, like, we'll start at 6 in the morning to arrange a bed, we would get by 3 in the afternoon, and it was very distressing, it was very stressful to answer the patient and their kins. And because it's golden hour concept which works in healthcare, basically you cannot lose that golden hour. So as that situation kept on happening, we were taking call on call basis, but that is not a policy situation. That is not going to if somebody calls me, I can help them, but what about the people who are not able to call? What about them? So that constant thought bogged down my father. So that is when we decided that it's actually oxygen that is the major problem. It's the lack of oxygen, because of which hospital beds are also in scarcity. So then the whole oxygen arrangement and the oxygen bank and everything else started. I'll say to you to ask another question, otherwise I'll just go on with the same thing.
Yes, thank you, Anjali ji, for sharing that experience of yours. You touched upon several aspects, which I'm sure would really help all our listeners in understanding the true nature and contours of the work done by the honorable speaker, sir. As I said at the outset, yes, state governments across the country have done their bit, but we should not forget that our elected lawmakers, our elected parliamentarians also did their bit. They did whatever was within the ambit of their powers to help their constituents. In your intervention, you touched upon several aspects, including this ward worker model, and also tying up with the Ministry of Railways, or rather, requesting the Ministry of Railways to arrange a special train, particularly for students. You also mentioned how this COVID helpline number came to the aid of people, COVID patients, and their relatives in Kota. If you could kindly elaborate on this ward worker model, because from what I understood, it is basically a decentralized model where you are empowering a ward worker, and I believe that perhaps to some degree this model could also be replicated in other parts of the country, in other parts of Rajasthan. So, if you could briefly elaborate on this ward worker model and how it helped as far as COVID relief work was concerned, then I'll move on to the next question.
So it's very important to have people who are working on ground, and especially during COVID when everybody was anxious that there has to be a distance which has to be maintained, etc. But it was on the insistence of Papa and also on the moral motivation that each one of the people living in Kota had, and we have to thank them that like they are the actual workers, so they are the ground workers who actually went to the houses. So they helped in numerous ways. But in the first wave, the major work was that we had to know that who's actually needed of those ration kits that I told that were made. So it was needed that their areas had to be located, and that work was done by the ward worker or the karyakarta, and they channelized that these are the people who are actually needful of those ration kits. And then they contacted Kota office of Papa, and from there they got the ration kits, and then they supplied to that locality. And because of that, we could reach the all of Kota and also beyond Kota, also all the, because for a MP it's not just Kota, it's Bundi, and it's also the 800 villages nearby. So we have to take care of every place, like father has to take care of every place. So then so this model actually worked pretty well, because we could there was no exclusion and there was no wrongful inclusion also. So both the things, and it empowered the worker, it fired the humanitarian aspect in the ground workers, in the karyakartas. They also felt very much touched. And there was also meetings which were held. So in during the first wave, every second day, father would pick up a locality and would talk to every karyakartas of those region, so that they stay motivated and they can also tell the problems which they are facing on ground. And similarly for all the villages, nearby villages as well, and also of other jillas as well. So this was what was done. That was the whole model. Now this model also helped in second wave, because when I told you that these primary medical kits were made, so these were distributed by these karyakartas only. Then later on, oxygen bank was made by philanthropists of Kotas with their help. So that oxygen bank had oxygen cylinders and oxygen concentrators. So those were also distributed by the ward workers, and request for them was also, they were a major link to bring request for those oxygen support as well. And the meeting thing continued, so that it's not like the policy making or whatever the person is doing, if he's empowered by the elected, if he's elected, then that should not be disconnected with what is actually needed on ground. So Papa would speak to the village representatives and to everybody else, like the karyakartas or anybody who wanted to speak to him from that village. And he would on every next to next day, he would have villages region wise video conferencing, and they could ask him that this is what is needed, so that he could better channelize the resources to what is actually needed on ground. So that was the whole model which helped in both the places.
So, this is truly a fascinating model where ward workers, where people on the ground were truly empowered, and because they were empowered, they were also able to deliver in terms of ensuring and facilitating COVID relief. My next question to you, Anjali ji, would be in regard to oxygen issues. Were there any particular incidents in Kota that you would like to share as far as oxygen related issues were concerned? We all came across issues regarding oxygen availability across the country, and yes, the union government did start an oxygen express train also. But were there any particular issues or some learnings from those issues that you would like to share with us as far as oxygen related issues in the Kota Bundi parliamentary constituency were concerned?
So in the starting, it was actually concealed that oxygen is the issue. We would come to know that hospital beds are in scarcity. Hospital beds are in scarcity. That is what's the major headline. But that's what I learned from this in the whole second wave of COVID is how transparency is so important, because this whole fact was concealed for a long time that it is the oxygen which is a major issue, that we could not be better prepared, we could not be better arranged. But as I said, that it became very apparent that it is the oxygen which is the major issue. That is why the hospital beds are not being increased. There are some beds which were vacant in the hospitals, but doctors were not admitting the patients because they were fearful that they would run out of oxygen, and and no fault of doctors. They were at no fault because the second first wave of COVID there was no oxygen crisis. So it is very rare that a person develops their oxygen level drops to that low, which actually happened in this second wave, that people's patients oxygen dropped to very low levels, which needed external oxygen support. So there were incidents where you know papa would get call from the collector or from the hospital heads that we can only survive for a day with the oxygen that's available. And we, on the other hand, we would get numerous calls from the patients that they are not getting hospital beds. So there was a constant question in your mind that you cannot let the patient die outside of the hospital just because you're fearful that you do not have oxygen in the hospital. So it's a very distressing situation that what are we trying to hide, what are we trying to do with this whole fearfulness of ours, and with the whole the patient is anyway die the patient, the human person is dying, who's dying outside the hospital just because we do not have oxygen there. So then there were arrangements made for oxygen all across the country. The government also came up with the plans, but we needed immediate solution. Like right now we do not have that oxygen crisis. So right now but there and then we did have oxygen crisis. So it became, oxygen also became rarer than diamond. So but there was constant asking for that these hospitals beds should be increased, and there were vacant beds in the hospital. But as I told you, just because everybody was fearful of oxygen, so in those times I think papa rose as a leader. And I mean, it will look like I'm doing psychophancy just because he's my father, but honestly I saw that he rose as a leader because he was very very forceful in saying to the district administration, in saying to the hospital heads that no matter what, you should not let the patient die outside of the hospital. I will provide oxygen to the hospital. You should leave it on me, whether I provide it from wherever that is. You should leave that on me. And that's how a leader should be. And that's what I particularly liked, that he rose to that level. He did not shrug off his responsibility. Particularly, he's not the only person who's responsible for oxygen or for the man dying outside the hospital. But then he rose to the opportunity. He said that this is absolutely wrong. We are trying to hide the numbers just because we do not want in official records that these many patients have died, or we do not want a misfortune happening in the hospital that so many people died because the hospital ran out of oxygen. But more than that, like four times more than that, those people are dying outside of the hospital just because we are fearful that it would run out. So he rose to the occasion. He said that we would not let the hospitals run out of oxygen, and the hospital and the doctors should admit the patients so that patients do not feel that they died because of lack of anything. And he did and he did deliver to his promise. There were calls made to the Reliance, where from the government actually allocated that these many tankers would be going, metric tons to oxygen would be going to each of the state. But then the demand was much more than what was allocated. So on personal intervention, he called on to the Reliance factory at I just skipped it from my mind from J. So he called on
At
from there, and
Jamnagar.
from Jamnagar, yeah, from Jamnagar. And the manager here there was actually my friend. So I also came into the picture. So I called him up as well. So then I made him speak to my father. So then those oxygen tankers were arranged at last hour so that they could come. Now the distance between Jamnagar and Kota is also 2 days, so you have to keep pushing and keep the doctors have trust in you. And I'm very thankful and very glad that the Kota hospitals and the administration cooperated, and those tankers were received well in time, and we could avert that situation. And it was not once or twice, three times tankers came, more than the oxygen that was allocated by the center government, so that there is oxygen is surplus, and so that no patient dies out of it. So that was the whole oxygen crisis and how panicking it got. But it got very distressing, because I also came into the picture. So I remember we would be just, because Papa gave his word, now he had to deliver to his word, but arranging oxygen at that time was really very, very tough task.
We can imagine how distressing it must have been, how difficult it must have been, and I believe all of us should acknowledge the exemplary work done by Shri Om Birla ji as far as the entire Kota Bundi parliamentary constituency is concerned. Now that the second wave is no longer at its peak, perhaps some would say that it is declining, perhaps some would say the third wave is around the corner. We do not know what is in the offing, but what transpired in the last few months, it becomes imperative, it becomes incumbent on us to acknowledge the good work done by our elected lawmakers. If we cannot even do that, then it's a very sad state of affairs. You shared so many valuable insights as far as resolving the oxygen crisis in and around Kota is concerned. Apart from the oxygen issue, my next question to you, Anjali ji, is what particular steps were taken by the Honorable Speaker, sir, for Kota? And I have one particular thing in mind. I believe some of us might be acquainted with this. The Honorable Speaker, sir, took a wonderful step of providing assistance to students whose parents succumbed to COVID. And he had a word with the coaching institutes in Kota. As we all know, Kota is a leading education hub. So he had a word with the leading coaching institutes, and he ensured that something should be done for them. So if you could throw light on that, what was the thought process behind that, and any such similar incidents or any such similar decisions that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, so when the second wave started decline, I think that's the normal human mind is like, I very average mind that I have. So I was happy, I was relaxed that I'm not getting any SOS calls or no distress calls. I was in a happy space. But I saw that the work my father did, that did not stop. In fact, he felt like, okay, that's done, now we should think about the people who are left behind, and people who have lost their loved ones, the kind of trauma they went through, we should do something for them. And it is when then he's decided to take up all these things. So there are like a lot of measures, and they are the measures that will continue. So for first, he thought that all the students who have lost their parents or the guardians, and they want to pursue coachings, because Kota is known for coaching. So he spoke to the coaching heads of Kota, like Allen, Resonance, etc. And they all also agreed to provide free education to all students all over the country who want to pursue IJE exam or NEET exam and want to take coaching from Kota. Their lodging would also be free, their food would also be taken care of. So that was a major step that got a lot of highlight. But there were a lot of other steps also. What about the people who are in school? What about those children? So that he could not do for all of India because of obviously his constraints, and that he represents a part of the country, that is Kota. So that he did for Kota, that he spoke to all the major schools of Kota, and on a video conferencing, and then they also came on board that those who have lost their guardians and their parents due to COVID, they would get free education, or their bread earning member, so they would get free education for entire time in their school. So that was also a very major step. Then what about the daughters who are left behind and their bread earning member have died because of COVID? So for that, he thought, he had taken this pledge that whosoever comes up to him, he would become the father, he would become the brother, and he would arrange for their marriage and whatever expenses come due to it. So these are the slew of measures, and he's very open minded to all other measures which can be taken. So that he keeps on asking me, bring out some more measures, advise more, what can we do more for the people. So it's an open ended thing, because every case we pick up, it's a different case, different kind of assistance, different kind of help is needed. But these are the broad measures that he took post the second wave.
Words cannot possibly do justice to the work that has been done by the Honorable Speaker, sir. This is truly exemplary. I believe no exaggeration is required. Nobody would even could even possibly contest that there is even an iota of exaggeration in this, because to do all this work, we can imagine how difficult it must be, how difficult it must be to coordinate with different stakeholders in the political system, the different stakeholders in society at large. But notwithstanding the challenges posed by the this pandemic, all this work has already been done. So that is truly remarkable. You mentioned about the fact that he coordinated, that he had a word with schools in Kota. So that is something that at least I did not know. So I'm really glad that because of this discussion, we are learning more about the COVID relief work that was being done. My next question to you would be, if we think of the entire oxygen crisis, or not just the oxygen crisis, but of all the COVID relief issues that we faced over the last few months, and as those developments were unfolding, if we think of all those issues in terms of policy, to your mind, what are a couple of policy related changes that you would like to see, which could ensure that we are better prepared as a society, we are better prepared as a nation, or in Rajasthan, if God forbid we were to face a brutal third wave or fourth wave, or whatever the case might be? So, if we were to just think of it in terms of the policy architecture, is there anything that you would like to mention in that context?
So we did plan out that we will have oxygen plants now, but I mean, like, the kind of virus that COVID is, and the kind of shortages it brings, those cannot be predicted, just because in the second wave oxygen was one of the crisis points. So in the third wave also that would stay, though, because the virus mutates, and it is mutating quite rapidly than usually it does, and also the situation also mutates. So I think that it's better to rely on science for the policies on matter of viruses to be made, and for the predictions. Because I remember, I only read a study by MIT, I think, that in India almost 1 crore people would be affected by COVID, and that I read like 2020 May, and I also found it absurd. But then my mind said that no, if epidemiologists are studying it, then there might be some truth to it. So, and that actually we have seen that official numbers, they are not true numbers. That's not a very concealed fact now. We all know that. So we have seen that a lot of our population have gotten struck by the virus. So we should rely on science and epidemiologists, and I am hopeful that we have a prime minister who has taken the charge of Ministry of Science and Technology. So we would have a whole committee set up in PMO itself, who will see that how the third wave would be, and they would just we can only rely on predictions, and in that way we would make policy based on science.
That is indeed true. We are supposed to defer to the wisdom of scientists and doctors when it comes to a virus like this. So I'll ask one last question, and then we'll just take a couple of questions. We have received several requests, but because of time constraints, we'll only be able to take a couple of questions. My last question to you, Anjali ji: your entire experience in facilitating COVID relief for people in and around Kota, in Kota Bundi parliamentary constituency, when it came to interacting with the district administration, when it came to ensuring that things fall in place, were there any specific aspects, were there any particular learnings you picked up which you might possibly incorporate in your career as a bureaucrat going ahead, particularly when it comes to district administration, how they handle the issue, and anything in that regard?
I think when there is no crisis, we must prepare for the crisis. That's my big learning. And secondly, we should prepare systems. If systems are in place, then all hell break loose. The system might like get haywire, but still you will have at least somebody to ask, somebody to tell something. And because I told you that the COVID helpline numbers were extended, the whole office was set up in Kota, in Delhi. So we knew that who to call who, and who will call who, and who will take care. So if the case would be of Delhi, we would know that okay, I have to call this person at Kota office. If the Delhi office, and if the case would be of Kota, I know that I will have to call this person in Kota office. So it was very well managed. So my biggest learning was that we must make that system in place already when we do not have the crisis happening. And the third biggest learning that I felt was that maintenance of records, and just having a personal touch to everything. I mean, as a bureaucrat, I would definitely take that forward with me, that whenever we take a follow up, whenever we ask people, people do get touched. And that's one, and that brings the human out of us, and that brings the human in them as well. So we just have to be kind, and need to keep maintaining records and keep following up to the people.
That is a wonderful perspective. Thank you for sharing that with us, Anjali ji. Uh, I would now request Bhavna ji to please ask her question to Anjali ji. My only request, please keep it short and precise. Bhavna ji. Bhavna ji, you can go ahead and ask your question. I believe she is not there. Ritul ji, you can go ahead and ask your question. Please keep it short and precise.
Hi, Anjali. There's just one thought and a question. Thought being, I think I can attest to whatever she said. Being a resident of the constituency, both member of parliament and she have always rose up to the occasion. In fact, I myself did a fundraiser, and she was there assisting. Even in the second wave, we tried working on a grief support system. Again, she was there, and it's not just that this pandemic that member of parliament has really come to the forefront. I've seen him on taking boat rides amidst massive floods, which is just last year. So this is something we're really really thankful for. But I have a question in regard to what Anjali said about what is being done in the post second wave phase. That being that while now things are opening up, what is there any sort of special cell still in order to assist people? Because this is when people are coming out, and I was just outside today, and I was going for some sort of pan card thingy, but there were people queuing up for final death certificate and stuff. And this is where the whole regulatory thing, people who've lost the government servants who are applying for their jobs and everything, this is where the bureaucrats really harass people for small documents. This is where the insurance loan and everything comes in, where even a small phone call from a legislator does put a lot of impetus. Is there being a dedicated sort of helpline existing now where people can reach out or complain against bureaucrats, or for officials? Because things as silly as a death certificate, we all know that how nagar nigams or all sorts of offices work. I mean, they're easily bribed for very very petty things. So now I think when people are coming out of grief and actually trying to take a stock of their life, this is where the Kafka's Cube bureaucracy is going to affect people. So just asking Anjali, is there anything that being done to really address that?
Hi, Ritul. It is so nice that you were there. It definitely boosted my confidence. So, Ritul is my childhood friend. Um, yeah, so the helpline numbers do are definitely in place. We've been getting calls that the now when people have to pay up, so the hospitals are charging enormous amounts. They are not accepting the insurance, etc. So all of these issues, and as much as the constituency is concerned, and as much as the rest of the India is also concerned, the calls are getting. So the helpline numbers still exist. Those numbers are Kota and Delhi office still exist, and they are getting registered, and the office is trying to do the best it can.
Thank you for answering that question. It was indeed a wonderful question, Ritulji. We all have to be aware that a third wave could be in the offing if we do not do our bit. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we'll not be able to take any more questions. I thank Anjali ji for taking time out of a busy schedule to join today's session. Today's session has already exceeded 30 minutes, so it turned out to be a very productive session. And the basic idea behind organizing this Twitter Spaces discussion, which was to understand the nature and contours of COVID relief work that was undertaken by Sri Om Birla ji in his parliamentary constituency, that purpose, I would like to believe, has been served. We got to know about so many interesting details. We got to know about so many interesting models, rather, that we were not aware of earlier. So many interesting models that could be replicated in different parts of the country if, God forbid, we were to face a brutal third wave of COVID. So, overall, it was a very productive session. It was a very enlightening session. And once again, I thank Anjali ji for sharing her perspective on the entire issue. Thank you to everyone who tuned in to today's session. Thank you and goodbye.